Hello, my name is Luke and I'd like to share with you a surfing technique that I came across a few years ago. It does seem to me in the world of surfing that there isn't really a technique that allows a surfer to go from a basic to an intermediate level, and more importantly from an intermediate to an advanced level. I know sometimes in the surf media this is pointed out, and I know that also there are a lot of surfers out there like me who've been surfing for a long time and who reach an intermediate level or slightly above intermediate level and tend to plateau and progress becomes very, very slow. This is something that I do believe can take a surfer from that basic level to the intermediate level, but much more importantly from that intermediate level to that advanced level. So in order to explain the technique, I do need to give a little bit of the backstory. It does help to understand the technique. So this all came about several years ago in Sydney. It was middle of summer, it was flat most of the time. We had maybe one bad day of surf a week and I wasn't getting any exercise. So I thought I'd try swimming, and I went along to one of the local pools and I did links, and I did it for several weeks. And after several weeks I realized that I'm not a very good swimmer and that I should probably improve my technique. So I inquired about the cost of a swimming lesson at the local pool. When I discovered the cost of a swimming lesson, I went online, I went onto YouTube and I found some lessons there, and I found a beginner, an intermediate and an advanced lesson. And I watched the beginner lesson first, and I went back to the pool and I did my best to implement those techniques, and my swimming improved marginally. It was when I watched the second lesson that my swimming improved significantly, and it's really the content of that second lesson that gave rise to the technique itself in surfing. So I'd like to explain that now. Okay, so the content of the second lesson went like this. A good swimmer imagines that there's a pole running straight down the middle of them. It goes in through the head, down past the spine, in alignment with the spine, out through the crotch and past the legs. This pole remains completely straight and also completely flat, or as close to it as you can get. This gives good swimming technique. In other words, when you are rotating your arms like this and the body is moving, it is not flexing side to side, or it's minimal at best. That pole has to stay completely straight. It's also not arching up and down, or at least it's kept to a minimum so that the pole remains completely flat. It's perhaps easiest to understand if you look at it from the head rotating point of view. When the head rotates to breathe, that pole stays completely flat. In other words, if you rotate to the left, you also have to rotate to balance it to the right and back. That pole, the integrity of the pole, the flatness and the straightness of the pole is never compromised. It has to remain as close to flat and as close to straight as it possibly can. Now obviously this does not really help in surfing because you can't stand on a surfboard and imagine that there's a pole running through you. But it can be applied in a certain way, and that's what I'd like to explain next. So at that time, I was working late in the city, and I used to walk home at night just to relax. And I was walking through a park, a local park one night, just letting my thoughts wander. And I was thinking to myself, it's a real shame that in surfing we don't have a technique like they do in swimming that allows a surfer to advance to a very high level. And I was thinking maybe there's some way I can apply this technique. I can approximate it on the board, a kind of a compensation technique like they do in swimming. In other words, if I was to lean over the board, I might poke my backside out a little bit and try and get some kind of different balance, some good balance on the board, see what happens. And a few days later, I was down in Maroubra, South Maroubra, and it was absolutely terrible. There were only 3 or 4 guys out, and I paddled out, and I remembered that I wanted to try this technique. So I catch my first wave, and I stand up, and I try to approximate some kind of balance on the board. And to my amazement, the board absolutely takes off, and I fly down the line. And I would say at that time, relatively speaking, it was the fastest I'd ever been on a surfboard. And this was a really tiny wave. It was fast enough that I managed to get into that layback that a lot of surfers get into on the end section when they are going very fast. And it was a very small wave. I didn't make the layback, but it seemed significant anyway. And I paddled back out and I was just buzzing. And I was thinking there's something in this, but I couldn't do it again because it's really not practical to think of yourself standing on a surfboard with a pole running through the middle of you. So a few nights later, I was walking through the park again, thinking about this, and that's when it dawned on me that it's a mistake to think of yourself standing on the board like this, but why not try it when you are paddling into the wave Why not try paddling in like a swimmer with a pole that runs straight through the middle of you, that does not bend or arch in any way. And this is basically it. This is the technique that I'd like to explain, because this one worked. So in the next section I'd like to explain that technique in a little bit more detail. It is quite straightforward, but there are a few things that need to be explained a little bit more to help with it, because it can be very, very difficult to do, particularly if you are taking a critical drop or moving very fast on your board. So I'd like to explain that in the next section. So I'd just like to say that this provides a basic structure to the body. It does allow you to surf with more power and more speed, so you can come off the bottom faster, you can come off the bottom harder, you can go off the top faster, you can go off the top harder. But aerial surfing, tail sliding, things like that are still several steps beyond at least this technique, but it does allow you to get into those positions a lot more easily. And that's the end of the first video. In the next video I'd like to elaborate on all of this a bit more. Thank you for watching.